Today on Alley Picked, I'm gonna make something cool out of this pile of scrap wood junk. No, not you, Woodrow. Woohoo! I have a bit of a problem. I'm a wood hoarder. No, I'm serious. I have a real difficult time getting rid of wood. Scrap wood. Why, here, let me show you. Just about anywhere I can put wood, I will. I'll lean it, I'll pile it, I'll stack it. Any open space is a good place for wood. I'll save a piece of lumber for 10 years and then I'll suddenly find a use for it. I get all excited because I didn't have to buy it. And wood's expensive. My second problem, well, that's space. I just don't have that much space in my garage to keep saving all of the scrap wood. It takes up valuable real estate. So, here's my plan. I bought this step stool about 20 years ago. It's Amish made, which explains why it still survives in perfect condition to this day. Anyway, it's made up of a lot of smaller pieces of wood, which is great to use since I have a lot of scrap wood. So I'm going to glue up a lot of the boards, cut them to the right size, and make as many step stools as I can. I can sell them on eBay, Etsy, I can give them away as Christmas gifts. Anyway, let's get started. Here's a sketch with the dimensions of what I'll be making. If you plan to duplicate this stool, you can pause the video, jot down some notes, or just take a screenshot and print it out if you want a hard copy. I went through all the scrap wood in my garage. These are leftover from projects that I've worked on over the last 20 years. Oak, walnut, pine. I'm not sure exactly how many stools I can make out of it, but I hope you'll stick around as now I make something cool out of junk. The first thing I need to do is clean up all the wood by removing knots, cracks, and any unusable parts. There's 3 different size pieces for this simple stool. I discard any pieces that are too short and I cut the longer ones down to fit into one of the 3 sizes that I need. Squaring the edges is vital before gluing the wood together. If they're slightly off, you can use a sanding block. If they're larger gaps, that'll require a hand plane or an edger. You can also try using a belt sander, but don't be too aggressive. I divided the wood into 3 piles, one for the legs, one for the horizontal supports, and one for the top. Some people just put a bead of glue between the boards. This has the potential to miss some spots. I put a thin layer of wood glue on the entire surface of both pieces. It may be a little overkill, but I'd rather waste a little glue to be safe than sorry. Here's a tip when gluing up the boards. I was always taught in my wood shop class to rotate the wood. What I mean by that is that each piece of wood has the grain running in more of a circular pattern. So if your first board is running like this, the second board needs to run the opposite, and so forth all the way down. The reason for this is that if you put all the boards with the grain in the same direction, it can curve your board. Now, some grain is straight, so that really doesn't matter. One other tip, you can combine different woods for a really interesting look, like oak and walnut. You really need to use bar clamps to squeeze the boards together while the glue dries. It's also important to make them as flat as possible by using a piece of wood on the top clamped to the bar. Now, with all the boards glued up, the next step is to cut them to the final size that they're going to be. Now, where each of the boards meet, they're at slightly different levels, and they need to be perfectly smooth and flat. If I had a wood planer, that would make quick work of it, but I don't. So I'm going to end up using a belt sander. Now, I can sand these right now, but I'm going to be wasting a lot of time sanding parts that I'm going to be cutting off anyway. So I'm going to make these the final size, and then I'm going to sand them. The more uneven the wood, the longer it's going to take to sand. I'm using 80 grit coarse paper for the first pass in order to get them flat quickly. Normally, you never want to sand across the grain, but in cases like this, where you want to even out the wood, you can go against the grain, followed by sanding with the grain until all of the sanding marks are gone. How many of you are saying, hey Tom, by gluing the wood this way, edge to edge, you're not really getting the strongest possible joint? You should be using some sort of dowel or fastener. Well, let me prove to you that by gluing it this way, the joint is actually stronger than the wood itself. Here's an example from a couple of the cut off pieces. You can see the wood itself splits, not where it was glued. Remember that pile of scrap wood I had? Well, I turned it into the pieces necessary to make 5 step stools. 1 walnut, 3 oak, and 1 pine. It took about 2 hours to cut and sand all the pieces of wood. But before I can start the final assembly, I need to cut the oval handle in all of the top pieces. I need to cut an angle in all of the top rails. And finally, I'll cut the shape of all of the legs. I find that coarse sandpaper glued to a 1/2-inch dowel rod and a ruler are great for sanding the inside of the handle cutouts. There's something else I remember my high school woodshop teacher telling me. I'll never forget. He said you should be spending as much time sanding and preparing your project for finish as you do building the project itself. And all of this is a testament to that. I just spent many hours in the garage sanding and rounding corners. I built up a layer of dust all over everything in my garage that'll probably take weeks to clean up. Anyway, now the fun begins as I can start putting all of these stools together. For assembling the stool, I'll be using a total of 12 screws and no glue. This device is called a pocket jig. I'm marking 5/8 of an inch from each end. Then, line up the end of the jig to this mark and clamp it tight. This is a special drill bit that comes with the kit, and there's a stop on the drill to keep it from going all the way through. You'll end up with what is called a pocket hole, and it's best if you use the correct pocket hole screws. Regular panhead screws will probably also work. I took careful measurements to get these centered. Both legs need to be positioned identically or your stool will be wonky. Sometimes when you screw in the legs, they have a tendency to pull a bit inward. We can push them back out to 90 degrees and keep them there when the side rails get screwed in. I marked 1 inch from the end and 3/4 of an inch from each side. I like to use an awl to mark the holes. It helps the drills to go in straight, right at the mark. Using a 3/8 of an inch drill bit, I'll drill about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch depth for the button screw covers. I like to pre-drill pilot holes to keep the legs from splitting. You probably don't even need to use glue for these. just put a piece of wood on top and give it a whack. This is my favorite stain, Minwax Dark Walnut. It goes on easy, I love the color, and it's somewhat forgiving if you don't sand it perfectly. Well, after a few coats of polyurethane, this will be finished. You can stain yours, you can leave them natural, you can put your favorite finish on it. I hope you enjoyed watching me make 5 cool step stools out of junk. Scrap wood that's been laying around my garage for years now has a purpose in life. I hope you enjoyed watching Allie Picked. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, cool things made out of junk, click on the bell and you can be notified when I release future videos. And until next time, I'll meet you in the alley. Oh, Dad, I forgot to tell you. Guess what you're getting for Christmas?